Hello, hello. Hey, how's everybody doing? Y'all ready to learn? Yeah? Y'all ready to learn? Well, it's too bad because I'm not ready to teach. Oh no. I forgot everything. Yeah, happens. All right. Let's begin. Okay, so this is the first part of a series about video game RPG design. If you're thinking about making a classic style indie JRPG in the style of classic Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy games, you are in the right place. I want to get right to the good stuff with this first stream. In the first half of the stream, I'll be giving general advice on starting a new project, how to actually get started, what kind of game to make as your first, scoping a project, programs to use, all sorts of stuff like this. And now I'm not sure how long this part is going to take. This might end up taking the entire stream. If not, if we have time after, I want to move on to talking about RPG game design, talking about the pillars of RPG game design and start talking about, what makes an RPG tick and how to think about your project, how to give you some tools on thinking about game design for an RPG in a kind of a more abstract way, and give yourself goals and all that for your project. So, because of this, in this first session, I'm not actually going to be starting a game proper. You guys feel free to get started whenever you like, of course, but on my end, I'm not actually even going to start designing anything. That's going to be on the next session, I guess. This is more like a planning phase kind of deal. So if you haven't really figured out an engine to use yet before we get started, you still have time. Next week we're gonna be going into more specifics, and we might even start building a vertical slice of the game. Also, I will be taking some short breaks to try and avoid Twitch ads interrupting me mid-talk, and also to give my voice a bit of a rest. I had a bit of a sore throat at the end of the RPG Maker crash course that I did last week. I'm not used to talking this much in a short time without breaks. So yeah, I think we can get going right away. Yeah. So, I set up a little thing here. There we go. We have a little blackboard space here. Woo! Okay. So, let's begin with general advice about starting an RPG project. So, it's very common for indie RPG projects to have an enormous scope. This leads to countless games that never see the light of day. It's because many RPGs that inspire us are these huge, epic 20 to 40-hour stories, if not more. And if you're working on your first or second RPG project, and it's a gigantic 10-plus hour journey with a large cast of characters, I recommend you strip this down into a smaller project. The recommended scope for a first RPG project, I would say, would be a short 3 to 4 hour long game tops. The kind of game with just, 1 or 2 dungeons in one town. Maybe just a single dungeon crawl with a few floors even. Keep it simple and to the point so you can polish it. Maybe the next project can be double that size. Something like 6 to 8 hours long. The smaller your project is, the more likely it is to be finished within a reasonable amount of time, and you'll be able to bring the experience on finishing this game towards the next one and making it bigger and better. Now, as you work on something, your motivation will go down over time. As you get through the fun parts and hit roadblocks and struggles, And as the game transitions from working on big ideas to working on details and polish and playtesting and bug fixing, this is inevitable. Every project starts fun and then turns into work. Even the most hobbyist, self-indulgent game projects do, if there's anything complex about them whatsoever. That's just the fate of every project. You can sometimes start projects planning them specifically to be as fun as possible the whole time. You can kind of do that. And once you start working on a lot of things, you kind of get a feeling for the kinds of ideas that are easy to implement versus the ideas that end up with a lot of work later. Like, for instance, I'd imagine if you make a kind of, like, I would say a Yume Nikki kind of game, if that's the kind of game you really want to make, that's probably the kind of game that stays fun the longest, right? Because if you're making a Yume Nikki kind of game, like, you're mostly just doing the creation part. There's very little, there's polish work, but there isn't really like a minimum amount of polish that any area needs. You can just put as much polish into it as you like, you know? But as soon as you get into like a general actual RPG with combat mechanics and balancing, that's when, you know, all the fun eventually turns into work. There's really no way to avoid that for this type of project. Conceptualizing things is fun, and it moves fast, and it's exciting, and it feels like possibilities opening up. But each of these ideas and concept adds more and more complexity you later need to put into hours to balance, polish, and fix. It's a little bit like the programming concept of technical debt. If you're aware of that one, this is kind of like a general game design version of technical debt. Every hour of fun that you work on a game at the start is paid by like 4 hours of work later, is kind of one way to put it. But this means that a big part of building a project, especially a hobbyist project where you don't literally have a boss paying you to work on it every day, or project manager giving you specific tasks to focus on every day, a big part is actually managing your own motivation. You can never underestimate this part of game development, especially on hobbyist projects or side projects or stuff like this. Managing your motivation is actually a problem. Like, you can't ignore it, or your project is very likely to die. So, if this is going to be your first project or one of your first projects, you need to make something that is small and manageable enough so that by the time you reach the slow and hard part, you still got fuel in the tank to push this project to the finish line and get it done. Another completely different way to look at it, a completely different reason to keep your project small, is your first game, if this is your first game, will likely be your worst. So best to not make it very long. Get those first shitty games out of the way quickly before you get to the better ones you'll make later. That's another... This one's a bit more cynical, but it's still kind of true. Now, this can be, for many reasons, pretty frustrating to hear. And this is advice that almost no one takes. Nobody follows this advice. I don't think I've ever... Okay, it might have happened a few times, but for the most part, no one follows this advice. When you're told you have to make your project simple, nobody follows this advice. And there's a reason for that. When someone sets out to make their first RPG, they do it because of a specific idea they want to make. That game idea is their whole motivation. And being told to strip this down or switch to something smaller can hurt that motivation. And as I was just saying, managing your motivation is actually a problem. You can't ignore this. So I think one solution that can help both keep the scope in check and maintain that motivation is to start with a smaller project that's related to the larger story or world that is motivating you. So you take a small but important part of this large story. You know, you have this big story in your mind. Now, I'm assuming this because I'm thinking most people who want to get into making an RPG, you know, most people who want to make an RPG is because they have one big mega RPG idea in mind. And that mega RPG idea involves an entire world with a whole cast of characters. And like, you know, people do world building, people have so many little ideas that they want to put in, and thinking about these ideas and thinking about this world and all the events and all the world building, all the characters and everything. That's what's giving them motivation and telling them, okay, throw all of this away to replace it with something new that you make up now on the spot that you have absolutely no interest with right now. It just kills people's motivation. So what you do is you take a tiny little slice of this world instead, and you make a small game just about that. You take a small but important part of the story and make a small-scale, focused game strictly about this one chapter. It could be part of the backstory of one of the lead or secondary characters. It could be based on some historical event that's important to your game's story. Maybe the triggering event that sets the real story in motion. It could follow someone who, in the larger future game, ends up being the antagonist. It could be part of your setting's creation myth or some other ancient legend. If you have this big, crazy world you've been thinking about and building over time, I'm sure you can find a small piece of it that if you worked on that tiny piece of it, it could grow into its own game easily. This is what you should use to make that first game. Think of it as a stepping stone project. It's a smaller, more focused game that feeds off of the motivation that sent you on this creative journey in the first place. Now, for this workshop, the example project that I'll be making is going to be a very bad example for the project scope. This is because I want this series to be thorough, and I'm still not actually sure what I'll be building on my end. There's also a possibility that I end up just talking and not actually making something, but I'd really like to make an example game that goes along with it, so we'll see. Because, I mean, you know, I could just, whenever I talk about game design, I could just draw things on paper here, but I feel like actually building a game in, like, RPG Maker as I talk about it is going to be just better to illustrate it. So I'm still not entirely sure how I want to handle, you know, showing by example as I explain stuff for the actual game design things. It doesn't actually, the example I was talking about earlier, what I was saying about the Stepping Stone project, it doesn't even need to be like a prologue of the game. It could be something that you didn't even think of being part of the game. It could be a piece of the backstory that in the eventual final game, that wouldn't even be included in it. It would just be another game that's related to it story-wise, you know? Like, think of it as, you know, an expanded universe kind of deal, sort of. Like, take something that you're not even, you didn't think would even necessarily be part of the game, but is still a part. Like, it could be, like I said, the backstory of a character. Or it could be some sort of historical event that maybe your game would never actually show you happen, but would refer back to as being really important, you know? Now, I mean, that's so Tazzelgran here says, what if my game has no story and nothing planned? That's fine too. Here I was talking about specifically if you were going into this with a specific idea, because this is a very common this is a very common thing that thrusts people into making an RPG, is that they have one big idea in their head that's like huge, right? If your game doesn't have anything planned, then you're actually starting from like a blank slate. So you can actually form the game from the ground up with the right scope. So you don't have that quote unquote problem involved here, because your motivation here is just to make a game. You don't have a specific, or maybe you do have an idea, but it's just not story related. Everyone goes into making games with different sort of creative urges, or different ways that makes them enthusiastic about it. So it all depends. Everyone goes into this with a different, with different motivation. I was just providing something here for people who do have this very specific motivation that could end up being a little destructive for their first project because it just makes it too big. But if that's not your case, if you're going into this and you don't actually have anything specific in mind yet, then yeah, you can actually craft a game from the ground up to fit what fits the scope of a first project. Yeah. So yes. Returning to what I was saying, the example project that I'll be making is going to be a very bad example for a first project scope, because I want this series to be thorough, and so I'll probably be building a lot of little examples to illustrate things I'm talking about, especially when it comes to level design. So even though I'm saying your first game should probably just have like 1 or 2 dungeons, or like you should be very conservative with the amount of things you put into the game. On my end, the example game I'll make is likely going to be. Oh, I should turn off the visuals. My example game is likely going to be filled with little dungeons, each representing different archetypes of levels and stuff. So this is one of these things of. This is a case of do as I say, but not as I do when it comes to the scope of the game. Because, yeah, just for the purpose of illustrating the things I'm talking about, I'll probably end up making a much larger game than you should for your first project. But it's all going to be, examples and samples and all sorts of things. Okay. Let's move on to how to actually get started. How to get started actually planning a game. So, in most cases in the industry, games should be planned out in great detail before going into development. But I don't think this is necessary for a mostly solo indie game, especially if it's made with something like RPG Maker. Planning is important to help coordinate a team of developers where devs all need to be on the same page and several programmers will be working in parallel on various game systems. For stuff like this, everything needs to be very well coordinated, right? And it's not just important for large teams. If you're also building a complex game from the ground up, then you need to plan ahead so you know all the features and mechanics your engine is going to need, right? But if you're using a pre-made engine and mostly work alone, things are very different. You can absolutely work on a game in a more improvisational way. This is one of the huge advantages of using pre-made engines. It opens the door to a more improvised development cycle that just isn't possible in most other cases. And now, you may want to do at least some planning, drafting out a general outline, organizing your thoughts a bit, organizing your goals for the game, the things that you want your game to push as important, the things you want to focus on. You might have some specific ideas in mind that you want to develop, and you want to make sure that the full game is going to get right, Basically, you might want to organize your thoughts, but this comes down to your own creative impulses. Everyone has their own approach, and even if you haven't found yours yet, you'll settle into one over time. It's just natural. As your projects grow, the need to have a bit more of a plan going in is probably going to grow as well, but if this is your first small project, only plan as much as your impulse drives you to. Over planning, in some cases, can be a bit creatively stifling. Um, a lot of things are going to seem good on the page, but won't actually work that well in practice. If your plans going into your first projects are very rigid, things could go badly if an important piece of your plan fails later. So you want to keep things flexible and don't be afraid to toss some of your plans when things don't work out. As you gain more experience, you'll have a better idea of what works and what doesn't. And your plans will be closer and closer to the mark. Even more experienced devs' design plans fall apart from time to time. The example project that I'll be building over the course of the workshop is going to have a mix of planned and improvised parts. Okay, let's go over some questions. And yes, it's really best to wait for those little breaks to ask questions because I might miss them. Yeah, I do recommend finding some way for you to organize your thoughts. But yeah, it can just be some text files, some text documents somewhere. Obsidian is essentially just a text editor, a really simple text editor that allows you to link texts together as if it was like a wiki on your computer, right? And so you can imagine how this can be really useful for organizing thoughts on like a big project because you can essentially navigate through all of these different text files as if it was a wiki. And that's pretty useful. So that is something I kind of recommend. You can also literally start a private wiki to organize things too. I know a lot of people do that. That's like it's a weird approach, but I know some people do that. Casual Chancers asks, will this workshop focus on the story writing aspect or coding or making visual assets? It's not going to focus on coding. That's because coding would be way too specific to like an engine. And I want to be as sort of engine, even though I'll be using RPG Maker for every for my example project. And last week before the workshop started, I actually did a RPG Maker MZ crash course for people who are getting into the workshop and have never actually made a game before, because that would be a really useful tool to just start with. I myself am, I'm a programmer, but I'm not like a good programmer. I can make something complicated, but I can't make something complicated that another programmer wouldn't pull their hair trying to understand. That's my point in sort of my programming career. I can solve most problems I encounter at this point, but not in a way that is good. So I probably shouldn't be giving people too much programming advice. As for writing, I can think of some things I could say about writing, but I'm not really a writer. I mean, I'm getting better at writing, but it is not at all my area. Look Outside's writing would be so much worse if Eric Shoemaker wasn't around to pick up the pieces and fix it. But I still have some things I could give. I could give some advice on writing that's very specifically related to like writing in video games. I do know some of that. Like I can give some advice on this, so I could maybe put together a lesson on this, but I'm not sure if I would have enough material. I don't know if I would have enough things to say that would actually fill a full session. It's probably advice that I'm gonna fold into other lessons whenever they're relevant. Let's see. When you talk about 2 short dungeons or 1 dungeon with multiple floors, what is the expected game time for the player? Game time for earlier I said like a 3 to 4 hour game overall is, I think, a pretty good for like a first project. I would say that's a good thing to aim for. It's not like a huge deal if it goes a little bit over. I'm just thinking like this is sort of the you know, this is how you should think about the game size. If it ends up growing a little bigger than this, it's not like a huge problem or anything. Just think of it as a 3 to 4 hour experience when you're planning ahead, it's not like a hard rule or something where if it takes 5 hours to play through the game, it's gonna fall apart. It's just think about it in just general scope, just as a general idea of how big the game should be. Let's see. How would one calculate playtime for an RPG at this phase? Just imagine an average player's experience of the game, not necessarily being super thorough. Just an average player, how long they would take to play through the game. Again, it doesn't need to be like a science. It's just the general vibe of how long the game is. And sometimes, it's very easy to underestimate that stuff. But just do your best. Let's see. Would you say hard focusing on some mechanics in a condensed game, 1 or 2 hours, would be a good idea? That would be, that'd be good. In like a very, very small game. That might be a little extreme, 1 or 2 hours, but sure, you could try that. But again, don't take the specific amount of hours too seriously. Just think of that as a general guideline for how big the game should be. Going off, have you played Yume Nikki, Frankie? Yes, I did. I did play Yume Nikki. I actually mentioned it earlier. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Yeah, using Trello to keep the timeline. Okay, I never actually thought of that. That might be useful. Mm-hmm. I do have some advice on collabing with people a little bit later. We're going to be the next phase, the next section is going to be about what you should actually make your RPG with, and programs and all that. And Oh God Wait 9, RPG Maker MZ is not necessary for this. No, like I said, this is meant to be engine agnostics. This is meant to be This is just a general thing about making games, making RPGs, JRPGs really. You don't need to fret if you don't have the same engine that I'll be using for making the example game. It's just I just decided to take what I feel is like the most generally accessible RPG game engine, so that if you are also starting out, this is going to be the engine you're most likely to be using, and it's going to be like the easiest engine to work with, right? So I just picked RPG Maker MZ because, it just makes sense for that. I'm interested in the writing aspect of video games, specifically the user interaction part, but I don't really have any ideas on how to make my story more interactive. Well, if you want to make your story very interactive, for like in an RPG context, that I'm not really sure how to answer that. I mean, we're going to be going into sort of your the most important things for you for your game. So we're going to be kind of going into this a little bit later tonight. Okay. You don't actually have to use pixel art for RPG Maker MZ. Actually, it's actually it has a very high resolution actually. So it actually is it represents kind of a move away from pixel art, which is which I'm personally a little bit irritated by. I feel like it's easier to use pixel art for these engines, and I feel like it was kind of a misstep for them to move away from pixel art as like the core thing. I feel like it makes the engine a little bit less user friendly. But yes, if to begin with you don't want to use pixel art and you want to do like illustrations and stuff like that, then yes, RPG Maker MZ is perfect for this. All right, let's keep going. So, what should you make your first RPG with? So, if you haven't yet found a tool set to make your game with, I recommend the RPG Maker franchise. I did a whole crash course on using RPG Maker MZ last week, and so that's one I really recommend. Now, there's drawbacks. There's drawbacks and advantages to just about any engine you would use. Uh, so RPG Maker, as I explained last week, it's essentially a pre-made engine. It's a pre-made RPG that's just blank, right? That has a blank world and a blank story for you to fill in. And using something like RPG Maker lets you just get right into building the world and building the story. The main issue, if you're using RPG Maker, is that you might need to adapt your idea to the engine instead of the other way around, especially if you're starting out. So RPG Maker is built with a very specific idea of what an RPG is like, and any way in which your game doesn't fit that idea, you're going to need to give. You're going to need to figure out some way to move around it, or, so you might need to negotiate with the program to find something that you can actually make with it that fits your idea. So that's the big drawback of using RPG Maker. Now, you can also use other more general multi-purpose engines instead. Now, of course, there's also other RPG development engines that are like competitors to RPG Maker. Like there's several ones. And yes, you can loosely wiggle things by finding, plugins but this is why I was talking about. If this is your first game, you're probably going to want to stick to the basics, right? But yes, as you work with RPG Maker for longer, you do learn a bunch of ways to change the engine a bit, to push at the edges and wiggle it around and make it pretty different. Plugins are essentially things you can download to change how RPG Maker works, to change how the game works. And this is how you can end up with games that are completely different, that are all made in RPG Maker. Because RPG Maker, like I said, it's like essentially a blank game that was made for you, but you do have access to all of the code of that blank game. So you can change how it works, but that takes a lot more expertise. And so if you're going into making a game for the first time and you're picking RPG Maker, you're probably not going to go that deep into it yet. That's going to take a little time, a little more experience for you to get there. So your first attempt at making something in RPG Maker, you're probably going to need to kind of mold your ID to the engine and not the other way around. Now, this isn't your only option, of course. You can use other more multi-purpose engines like Game Maker, like Godot, like Unity. And if you do this, now you're going to be molding your game to your specific idea. You're going to have way more control overall, but the learning curve to actually get to make your game is going to be way bigger. It's going to be way more work overall. It's going to take way more planning. It's going to be a lot harder to improvise. So what I was talking about earlier, that things like engines like RPG Maker allow you to essentially improvise a game. You can't really do this if you're using a more multi-purpose engine, because you need to actually build the game then. You need to know what you're doing in advance. Now, there's still ways to improvise. You can sort of, build an engine in advance that's generally what you want to do, and then improvise from there. But it takes a lot more time to get to the design phase, there's just way more technical barriers to cross before you get to just making your world and your story. But yes, so RPGs are very complex to build, and they involve a lot of systems working together. So if you're a beginner, it's best if you keep the technical barriers as low as possible to help your experimentation. You want to, because if you're a beginner and you're getting into making RPGs, you're learning two different sets of things at once. On one hand, you're learning the technical side of making a game, of using the engine that you're using. And on the other hand, you're learning to play in the design space of RPGs. You're learning to design an RPG. These are two completely separate things that you're learning at the same time, right? And that's a lot. So I'm saying this entire workshop is about the design space part, right? Is the this other chunk. So I'm telling you, for your first game, you want the other part to be as easy as possible, to let you experiment with, the design space. You want the technical barriers as low as possible, so you can get comfortable just playing around with RPGs as a game genre as quickly as you can. Okay. So that was what you should make your first RPG with. Basically, RPG Maker is the answer, or whatever other direct competitors they have. That's basically the answer. The too long didn't read. Oh yeah, was RPG Maker Unite kind of bad? I remember hearing about it, but I didn't really hear much more past that. Yeah. Rip. Yeah. There was one on. Yeah, there was like a new RPG Maker. What was it called again? Yeah, there has been. Yeah, there has been console RPG makers. There's been one. There was one on the SNES that was only in Japan, I think. There was a PS1. Yeah, there was an original PlayStation RPG Maker. I think most people in the US, that was the first one they could use, right? Because that one actually was released in the US. The one that I first used was RPG Maker 2000, which wasn't legally released outside of Japan, but it was illegally translated by Don Miguel, infamously. I think he also translated 95. So that I started on RPG Maker 2000. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of early RPG Maker users were using that. Yeah, RM2K was like the big starting point for a lot of people. I think that's kind of like the one that really made it blow up. Yeah, it's kind of wild. It's a pirated program essentially is kind of what launched that franchise. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Maybe it was already like big enough in Japan that you can really say that launched it. But definitely launched it internationally. I think outside of Japan. Hmm. Okay, we have a big part next. I might need to break this one into halves. This next part is about obtaining art assets and music for your first project. There's a lot to go into here. So, yeah, for a beginner, getting art assets for your game can be tricky, especially if you're no artist yourself and don't have many connections to artists and composers who can help. So, here are some options. So first, we got The RPG Maker RTP. I think is that an image of the RTP there? There we go. I think that's it. Ah, yes. The RTP. Well, it's not actually called the RTP anymore. It's not actually called the RTP anymore. It used to be because it used to be like a separate package that people could download, that you needed to run games, and you just kind of because now all assets are included. Because now all assets are included in the projects, so it's not a separate package anymore. Because now all the games are just um, so it's no longer a separate package. It's now just part of the game itself, always. Because all the games made in RPG Maker now are browser games, so everything is packaged together. So yeah, calling it an RTP doesn't make sense anymore. But anyway, but this isn't really just about the RTP specifically. This is about packaged in assets. So if you use any version of RPG Maker, it comes with a packaged in asset pack. Older versions of RPG Maker called it the RTP, or runtime package. And although these can work, they will result in a fairly generic looking game, sharing a visual look with thousands of other games. If you intend your first project to just be design practice, a stepping stone on your way to bigger things, this is perfectly fine. If you would like to sell your game, though, this will definitely be detrimental to that. So you should keep your expectations low for sales of your first game anyway, so I don't think you should worry too much about your assets at this point, and using the default assets is a perfectly viable option. And the example game that I'll be making over the course of this series will be using the packaged in RPG Maker MZ assets. I'm probably going to modify some of them just as examples of modifying assets, and also just kind of for the fun of it. But I'll try to stick to basic stuff. I might also get an asset pack. That might also sound to be a fun thing to do, to just kind of show the process of looking for an asset pack and getting it and installing it and whatever. But I don't know. Next, we have asset packs, stock assets, and public domain. It's a bit easier to stand out if you use marketplace bought asset packs for your games. Although these will also be shared with other projects, and they also tend to look a little bit generic, but still, it's definitely a step above from using the default assets. And they won't be quite as common in other games. For music and sound effects, you can find whole libraries of royalty-free or freely usable public domain sounds out there. Freesound.org can provide a lot of sound effects with various use licenses, from attribution license, where you just need to credit the sound developer in your project, to completely free licenses for sounds that you can use with no requirements whatsoever. Now, you should always consider editing and customizing stock assets you used, whether they are default or store-bought, provided that you're allowed. However, this has become more tricky in recent years. The more modern versions of RPG Maker use a higher resolution, which makes it a bit more difficult to edit and customize, which is something I very often complain about, as you noticed. This is the second time I talk about this today. I feel like these higher resolution assets are a lot harder to tweak and edit yourself compared to the lower resolution SNES style assets of previous versions. RPG Maker MZ does give you the option to reduce the game's resolution, which lowers the difficulty and workload for a beginner artist, but that version only provides assets for the full resolution. So if you change the resolution of your game in RPG Maker MZ, you need to find entirely new assets for the project. You start from nothing. You basically lose the asset pack that RPG Maker comes with. if you lower the resolution. So yes, that's unfortunate. That adds an extra step, an extra barrier if you want to customize your assets a bit. Now, another thing you can do is asset rips. Asset rips from classic popular games from the SNES era. Crimes. We're talking about crimes, folks. This was a very popular approach in the early days of the RPG Maker community. It's a bit more work than using a pre-made asset pack, as you need to organize and format these assets for use in the engine. Obviously, it also limits your ability to put your game on sale because you don't have any license to use those assets, and you might have some ethical misgivings about plagiarizing the creative work of other artists, even if those rights are held by a corporation rather than the original author in the case of taking from classic old games. Legally, there might be a bit more leeway if you use these assets as a base to edit and work from as you learn the ropes of pixel art, but that's still legally dubious, I imagine. Definitely more of an option if you're making a fan game, and in general, if you aren't really interested in selling the game and just want to share it with the community or make it to practice your craft, you know? And yes, a Spriter's resource is a very good place to find assets. Of course, if you gotta find assets in Spriter's resource, it's not going to be formatted for you to use in RPG Maker or whatever engine you're using. There used to be, back in the RPG Maker 2000 days, entire communities about taking games, like classic games, and then taking the art from those games and turning them into asset packs you could use in RPG Maker. And maybe those assets are still out there somewhere for you to use if you find them. Who knows? But yes, nowadays, of course, yeah, usually you'll find stuff in Spriter's resource, and you'll need to figure out how to cut them up and send them up properly for you to use in your own project. Like I said, legally and ethically dubious. But, if you're not really selling your game, it's an option. Yeah, there's some games that give the impression. Sometimes it's just that someone probably learned by editing sprites, and maybe they just adopted the styles of those games too. It's hard to say sometimes. But yes, there's some games where you kind of get that vibe. Now, speaking of ethically and legally dubious, a more recent development here is to use text-to-image generative AI, which comes with some of the same legal and ethical issues with, stealing artwork is pretty relevant here. Many argue it's essentially plagiarism again, just with a lot of extra steps to obfuscate the theft. And the legality of generative AI is still an open question, and many people are politically opposed to their use for these and other reasons, and will likely refuse to play your game if they realize AI was used in the process. So yeah, I don't really recommend that one. Now, next point is hiring an artist. Can you believe it? Hiring an artist? Well, if you have the funds, as a beginner developer, you can probably find some beginner artists who won't ask for a very high rate, but RPGs need a lot of assets, so even a fairly low rate will add up to quite a bit of money, unless the game is designed from the ground up to be very light in art assets. Using a lower resolution for art assets will definitely help here. So this is another part where, the higher resolution of RPG Maker MZ is gonna kind of bite you, because if you use that higher resolution for your assets, that's gonna be a lot of work. That is gonna be a lot of work. But if you use a lower resolution, that will definitely help here. A combined approach of asset packs plus a few handcrafted original pieces for the more important game elements like the final boss can be a pretty cost-effective approach. You just start with an asset pack, and maybe you hire an artist to help you customize the asset pack, and maybe they'll make a few unique sprites here and there when you need something very specific. That sort of thing can work. So a combined approach, I think, is definitely a good idea. But of course, this expense is much harder to justify if your project doesn't have any commercial ambitions whatsoever, which your first RPG should probably not have anyway. But on the other hand, hiring artists would add a layer of management work to the project, which will make it a bit more complicated, but could be a valuable experience. So it's still something like you shouldn't think of hiring an artist as like a first thing, but it might be valuable experience. Now, similar to hiring an artist is teaming up with one. You can team up with other creative folks who can shore up your own development skill set. One designer who's also an artist, or another who's also a musician, or one who's a writer. And now, if you do this, you must be willing to give up some level of creative control, depending on the level of involvement. This may be just as much their project as it's yours, which can increase the complexity of development. But similarly to hiring artists, this would also add a layer of complexity to be working as part of a team to coordinate with, but that's also valuable experience. And if the project has any commercial ambitions, figuring out an agreement with your associates will also be very important. And now, of course, we have the final option. Programmer art. Yes, it is. That is the final list. The final thing in my notes. Programmer art. You can try to embrace a more simple style for your game and do the assets yourself. Even if you have little experience with art. Of course, if you're already an artist, this will be moot, but if you aren't, this is the programmer art option. This can be difficult and frustrating if you have little interest in drawing or composing, but your game will likely stand out quite a bit. There are many games out there with simpler art styles you can use as your inspiration that will be much more attainable to a beginner artist. These games tend to have a very unique look that make them quite memorable. They might be abstract or messy or just plain odd looking. You should consider this as an option for some of your first games. It's going to make it very obvious that it was one of your first games too. That's kind of a bonus. And who knows? You might even develop a knack for art through this. This is how I got started into pixel art myself. I had no interest in drawing. I only started to draw because I needed assets for the first few games I worked on back in the day, back in 2004. My first games looked very tough, and now it's time for me to show again what my first games looked like. It always comes back to this. I always need to get the old projects. That's right. It's sluggy time. Show it. There we go. This was what my first finished game looked like. Not my first game. My first 8 attempts at a game, at least, are completely lost to time, thankfully. This was probably my 9th or so game, really. But yes. Absolutely. So this is Sluggy Adventure. And oh wow, this is bad. Let me get this. Here's another one. Yeah, weak blocks. And over here, Castles Run. And Dungeons Aquarium. This was Game Maker back in 2004. Game Maker's been around for a long time. And Catacombs. And Rough Rain Ravage. There we go. So yes. Programmer art. So my first games looked pretty rough, but I developed a taste for pixel art through them, and within a few years, I was actually starting to draw for fun. 20 years later, I'm now a professional artist with credits on multiple games, specifically for art. I would have never thought I would end up as an artist back then. Having to draw art for my game back then was an annoyance, just something that needed to be done. And just by doing it, I just started having fun, started getting a bit more ambitious, which actually made the games worse at first. That's another little thing I like to bring up. That at first, when I was starting to get better, the games actually looked worse because I was trying too hard. Like I was starting to get confident, but my confidence was growing a bit faster than my skill. And so the the game I made after that one was busy and a huge mess, and you couldn't see what was happening. It was worse than the first. But after that, slowly, started to actually improve more. But hey, it happens. Now, I don't mean to say that this is a typical career path or anything, just that you don't need to think of yourself as an artist to try and make some game assets. Sometimes you can just fake it till you make it. Now, for sound, if you've never composed music, you can still give it a shot. It won't be a masterpiece, but you might make something usable. There's plenty of ways to make music, and I'll go into software and tools in just a bit. One option for background music is to use royalty-free sound effects, like from freesound.org, and create atmospheric soundscapes in place of music. This is generally much more accessible than composing music is. It'll be more useful for horror or atmospheric games, though, but it's easier to fit this into games with an eerie tone. But you can use a microphone, you can record noises and voices yourself, or sample sounds and noises from just about anywhere as a base for your game's own sounds and music and sound effects. Take some noises and slow them down and put some effects in, and boom, simple as, it just works. You know what? And you know what? I'm just going to show you. I'll do it right now. I'll do it live. I'm going to just launch Audacity, and I'm going to make a spooky background thing. All right? Let's just do it. Okay, I'm going to record my voice here, and I'm going to make a weird noise. That was a weird noise. Okay, I made a weird noise in my microphone. I'm sorry, I had to do it. Okay, I'm going to lower it because it peaked pretty badly. All right, it peaked pretty bad here. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm going to slow it down. I'm not even going to use pause stretch. The easy thing would just be to use pause stretch. Okay, I'm going to use pause stretch. Okay, I'm going to use pause stretch because that's literally just a single thing and it just turns it into a spooky sound. I have to show how easy it is, I have to show the most easy version of this. That's some spooky shit right there. Now, that's some spooky shit right there. That's usable. This is usable. This is an asset, folks. This is a sound asset. Simple as. Sometimes you just need to try something. Yeah? I told you. You could do that. It's easy. You can do shit like this all the time. Just experiment a little bit with tools, and you might find that some stuff is actually really easy to do. All right. Let's see. Dark Audacity. You should get Dark Audacity. Don't get Audacity. Dark Audacity. Unfortunately, Audacity is a really good program, but it was taken over by a sinister corporation that did a bunch of sinister things to it. And now if you get Audacity, it might be filled with spyware. So don't get Audacity. Get Dark Audacity. This is like the fork of it that sort of took over. I think there's a few different forks. So yes, don't get Audacity. Get Dark Audacity. Yes. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Private equity firm took it, I think. Something like that. But yes, it is free. It is completely free. The legality of repurposing a sound effect from an existing game. I don't know. I imagine it's not. I imagine it's one of these things where it's probably like you can probably technically get in trouble, and it's more a question of how likely they are to notice. You know, it's like it's probably one of these things that's like it's probably technically they can sue you for that, but it's more about are they going to find out or not, right? That's basically it. I mean, I guess all crimes are like this. I just described how crimes work in general. It's just an easy one to get away with, I guess. you know? Like, oh yeah, and also yeah, it depends on if they care too. Yeah, it depends on the specific dev. Yes. Some devs are just not going to give a shit. And some devs are going to try to get you to pay however the fuck they can. And so, yes, it also very much depends on who you're stealing from. So basically, like all legal questions, it depends. It depends. Is always the actual answer. But yes, so there you go. So hey, if you haven't even tried making sounds or music or anything before, you should just give it a shot. You would be shocked at how many things are actually way easier than you think. Now, getting really good at it and making amazing things, that's going to take a lot of work. But you're not looking to make amazing things yet. You're just trying to make something. You just want something to put in your gosh darn video game so that the little character can move around and fight monsters and whatever. You're not looking to, you're not looking to be making high art yet. You just want to learn to do things. So experiment. Just give it a shot. You might find making music just comes kind of naturally to you. Or at least making okay music. Or you might make something that's entertainingly a disaster. And that can be fun too. And also, another thing you can do. Now, you should probably look into the specifics every time you try something like this. Because sometimes that might not be the case, but if you have some stock music that you're allowed to use, you might sometimes also be allowed to modify it and mess with it. So for instance, here is music that comes packaged into RPG Maker MZ. And there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of like different songs and stuff. Here's Dungeon 1. All right, Dungeon 1. Okay, what is this thing? Damn, that's kind of good actually. You know what? I didn't expect. I expected this would be shit. This actually kind of slaps. Now, Audacity isn't really meant for music composition. It's meant more for messing with sounds. Yeah. If you want to compose music, it's not Audacity you're going to be using. You might want to look for some other like programs that are specifically for composition. And I don't know. So I'm not at all a composer. I've messed with Fruity Loops or FL Studio a few times. And like I have some fun messing with it, but it's probably not the best program out there anymore. For a while, that was like because Fruity Loops or FL Studio has like kind of a free trial that you can use anytime. But I'm sure there's a better free version now. There's a better free alternative. But for a while, that was like the really good free option for making music. But yeah, okay. So let's take a tiny bit of this here. Let's do some plunderphonics. Let's do some plunderphonics. I love plunderphonics. Plunderphonics is what you do when you steal music. When you take a bit of song and you use it. That's called plunderphonics. All right. So let's say this bit I just got here. Okay. Let's grab this. And simple as. Simple as. All right. I got a good loop. I got a good loop. Izzy, you want to get a good loop? Just look for the dents in the sounds, and you're gonna get something kind of clean. Just look for those dents, so you're not cutting a note like a note, right? All right. Now let's slow this down here. So I copied it over, okay, and let's slow this one down with change speed and make it like 30% speed. All right. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. This is not my area of expertise, folks. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's go. No, this works. This is great. Amazing. Oh, okay, right. I should have made it 33% instead of 30%. It doesn't actually work. Whoops. Yeah. What was I doing? You're right. Oh no. I messed it up already. Okay, hang on. Yeah. There we go. That'll fit. Okay. And I'll pan this one to the left, and I'll pan this one to the right, and I'll lower the volume of the faster one a bit. Okay, there we go. What does that sound like? That's just nonsense. I love it. That's completely worthless, but you know what? Technically usable. Technically usable asset, all right? All right. You get the point. It does loop. That's right. Okay. But you get the point. You can just experiment. If you might try something like this and maybe it's gonna be good instead of bad like this was. See? You just have to try it. Just have to give it a shot. Sometimes you might just surprise yourself. Yeah, so you can also take stock music and mess with it. Slow it down, speed it up, cut it up. Try looping some sections, mix some pieces together. Who knows, you could develop a knack for it, or at very least, you might have fun. No, it's already lost. I didn't even save it. That's right. All music is technically usable if you just have low standards enough. True. Okay. Now, if you plan on making some assets yourself or modifying existing assets, here's some software you might want to pick up. I recommend GraphicsGale or Sprite as programs to draw pixel art. GraphicsGale is free, and it used to be my pixel art program of choice, but I've grown to prefer Sprite since. Though this one now does cost some money. You can also download GIMP as a freeware image processor to modify art assets. It's like freeware. It's like a freeware open source version of Photoshop. It's not really what I would use to draw pixel art, but it's still useful to have around. Yeah. You can get a Sprite on Steam. For composing music, it's not my area of expertise, so you should probably look around on your own or ask others in chat. I think June earlier mentioned PXTone. That's like Pixel's composition one, right? That's the cave story one, right? PX Stone. Um, Also, yeah. So I used to use Fruity Loops or FL Studio, but it's not a fully free program. Fruity Loops slash FL Studio um, is like it's technically it has like a free trial, and it's technically a free trial that doesn't have any limitations except like you can use all of its features, or at least all the features that aren't locked into like behind like premium stuff. Um, but it doesn't let you load a song you made before. So if you use Fruity Loops FL Studio, you need to like every song you make needs to be a one and done. And basically it keeps all of your previous work hostage, and you need to pay them to be able to open them and use them again, which I really hate personally as a way to get money from you, to just keep your own work hostage. I kind of really hate that. But, yeah, there's probably a lot of way better options out there. Um, for putting together sound effects, BFXR is a great simple program you can use to generate retro sounding noises. Here is BFXR. You just need to go on bfxr.net and you can use it to make noises. It's going to be very specific, and the sounds it makes are kind of recognizable. So some people are a little irritated whenever they recognize those sounds. But yeah, you can just make noises, and there's knobs to mess with the result. And there's a bunch of like pre-made buttons here. You can mess with the results a lot. You can also download this. You can actually download this to like use it on your machine. But you can also just use it online like this. So it's very useful. It was actually originally made by Inc. For use in the Ludum Dare game jam. And it's really useful. I've been using it for sounds for almost all of my games. I've been using a mix of like BFXR and also like freesound.org for most of my games, and also sometimes just record things myself. But yes, so this is just a sound generator with a bunch of little knobs, and as you work with it, you start kind of learning a little bit how to use it. Yeah, there's a lot of really fun stuff you can do with this. You can even like edit some of those sounds together a little bit. So once you make some sounds, you can actually like... Oh no, this is different actually. Wait, hang on. Huh. Okay, this is actually a new thing. This is like a generator for like footstep sounds. This is new. That's kind of fun. I didn't even know about this one. Huh. That's cool. But there used to be another thing where you could edit sounds together here. I guess that's gone? Weird. But yeah, that's a really good one. So yeah, just remember BFXR. That's the site. bfxr.net, and you just have access to this. You can export them as WAV files, or there's other things you can export here. Yeah, it's really nice. Maybe it has more features. Yeah. So yeah, you can use freeware programs like Dark Audacity, like I was showing earlier, to edit and mix sounds together. You can even edit and modify some of RPG Maker's own stock sound library in that way. Also, for programming, if you're going to be using RPG Maker and you're thinking about maybe doing some plugins later, or maybe tweaking code and stuff like this, I recommend Notepad++ as a general purpose program for scripting and programming. Yeah. So that's basically it for the general advice on getting started. We're going to take a short little stretch break. And after that, we're going to get into actual RPG game design. Okay, let's go over some questions. And yes, it's really best to wait for those little breaks to ask questions because I might miss them. Okay, let's get into actual RPG design at last. So, I'm going to offer you one way to think about how RPGs tick design-wise. Hopefully, this is going to help you sort of structure your thoughts a bit about RPGs, especially if you haven't really worked on one before. This should, I hope, get people going and thinking about RPG design. And to me, this is a way of thinking about them that's useful to me, and hopefully it'll be useful to you too. So, RPGs are fairly complicated games, design-wise, in part because they mix different decision-making tasks that interlock together into one big experience. Let's conceptualize these as 3 pillars of RPG gameplay. 3 pillars of RPG gameplay. The 3 pillars, the 3 monoliths. We have management. We have exploration. And we have strategy or combat. I put a little crown on exploration because it's my favorite. But it doesn't have to be your favorite. But it's mine. Aw. Okay. Yeah, the nipple pillar. You're right. So you can think of strategy as the short-term immediate decisions that keep you alive. Management as the long-term planning. And exploration as something in between that ties it all together. This is just one way to think about these games that I think is useful. Any way of structuring something as loose as video games is going to be contrived to some degree, but it can still be useful. If it can help you decide what kind of game systems and features would help your idea and what kind would be a detriment, then it's successful. The most general basic gameplay structure of most JRPGs goes something like this. First, management in town. You buy gear, you gather info, you get supplies, you're preparing, planning ahead. You're thinking about your next steps, your goals. A lot of your thinking here is long term. You're in no immediate danger. You think about the game's story, the game's characters. You think about where it might be headed. You remember previous events. This might not always be in a town, and look outside. This is when you're back home, when you're trading with someone. But anytime you're in a familiar, generally friendly place you can call home, that you can return to when things get too heated outside. This is when management is king. Now, of course, there's also going to be moments all over a game where management rears its ugly head, but this is when it's dominating, right? Then you step out into the world, and the second pillar begins to dominate, exploration. You navigate terrain, you find interesting locations and explore them. You keep an eye out for valuables or clues or new unexplored places. You try to remember where you've been, what loose ends that you left behind on your last excursions. You solve puzzles, you solve mazes and other navigation challenges. You commit the space you explore into memory. You try to form a mental plan of the places you've been through. You slowly become more familiar with them. You look for secrets. You decide when you should press onward and when you should turn back. This decision might be based on gut feeling, on the state of your party and your resources, or how dangerous this area you're in seems to be. And then, as you explore, you will eventually be ambushed with enemies. And obviously, this is when the third pillar dominates strategy. Monsters attack. You use your slowly developing grasp of the game's systems to fight enemies using the tools and supplies you've collected so far. If you're fighting something familiar, you draw from your memory to remember the best moves. If you fight something new, you improvise carefully to try to figure out the best way forward without wasting too many resources. If something unexpected happens and you find yourself in danger, you need to react to get yourself out of trouble. Maybe you escalate your combat strategy to something more wasteful but powerful. Maybe you start using some more valuable items to get yourself out of danger. Maybe you decide to cut your losses and flee. And so you return to exploring, and you continue exploring and fighting and until you run out of supplies or until you find what you were looking for, and you finally return to town and return to manage resources. And you repeat this cycle until the credits roll. This is most JRPGs, to some degree, are kind of built on this. Most games in the genre more or less have this structure to them. There's variation, of course. Like I said, any attempt to structure games will lead to some simplifications, but I think this way of thinking about RPGs help. Now, though all three of these pillars will usually be present in some way, not all games have them in the same balance. Some games put a larger emphasis on management, forcing the player to juggle a complex array of resources or making crucial decisions about the adventuring party's makeup and build. Others de-emphasize long-term planning for more carefully balanced and paced moments. How easy or difficult should it be to heal your party in combat? What about between battles while exploring? How easy should it be to heal your characters at all? Depending on the importance of resource management in your game, the answer to these questions might be completely different. So games that focus on the exploration pillar instead will have players get lost in complex levels looking for secrets. Others will keep exploration simpler, using it more to set the pace and ambiance between battles and key story moments that provide that don't really provide much of a navigation challenge. So these three pillars are often in tension with one another. A decision to promote one can be a detriment to another. Having some idea of where your game's interests lie between these three can be useful in building a harmonious set of game mechanics. So here are some examples of decisions that sort of like promote one against another. So this is why I'm thinking of this way of thinking about RPGs as useful, because it helps you decide what parts of typical RPGs fit your idea more or less, based on what you value personally when you're building it, right? So here's some examples. Random encounters versus exploration pacing. Does your game need random encounters? For some games where map traversal is meant to come at a resource cost, this is appropriate. If your game is more fast-paced and focuses more on individual battles than endurance, those might just be a waste of your player's time. It might be superfluous, and removing them could be an improvement. But some games remove random encounters altogether and replace them with visible chaser enemies you can avoid through navigation in the field, like Look Outside does, or replaces them entirely with scripted encounters that appear in specific spots, like a Chrono Trigger, for instance. This can be a big help for the game's pacing to remove the random interruptions of exploration. But it diminishes the resource management aspect of the game because usually you have some sort of straightforward, safe way back to town available for you, as long as you're skilled at avoiding enemies or as long as you cleared all the encounters on the way. So Chrono Trigger, for instance, it's a game that completely forgoes the usual world map battles and has scripted encounters at specific locations. And this makes perfect sense for that game because it was a fairly unusual decision for a JRPG at the time, but the game was all the better for it. It has amazing pacing for its time, and it feels very modern compared to other games from around that time. As a counterexample, the same decision to remove random encounters on the world map or in dungeons would probably be a mistake for most Dragon Quest games, where resource management on the way to the dungeons are a more important part of the experience. You're constantly thinking about whether to keep going or turn back when you play a classic Dragon Quest game. You have this constantly evolving risk assessment. You not only think about your resources for going forward, but also the resources you would need to safely return to town later. Deciding to return a bit too late when nearly dead can make for an extremely tense walk back. You don't know if you're going to encounter 1 or 2 encounters on the way back, or 3, or you might even get really unlucky and encounter something super dangerous. So you have to involve this extra risk assessment. You need to have some fallback strategies in case something really bad happens. Now, on the other hand, if your game does in fact focus on both management and exploration, you may want to be careful about very difficult, tightly designed bosses that you can only defeat with a fully healed max resource party. So there's also kind of a tension between difficult boss battles and resource management. These are two other things that are kind of in tension with one another. You can have both if you like, but the more you rely on resource management as a part of your game, the looser your boss battles need to be, in a sense. So very tightly designed boss battles that you can only defeat with a fully healed max resource party. If you find yourself overly relying on boss fountains to make your boss battles work, boss fountains are this game trope where when a game suddenly gives you a bunch of resources just before a big battle to make sure you have everything you need to win. If you end up making a game where you always need to put these before every boss, it kind of makes your boss feel like it's a completely separate challenge from the level that led up to it, You may be squandering a lot of potential tension that comes from running low on resources as the threat of the boss looms ahead. Should you turn back now or can your party take it? So again, you can see how this, if you're focusing on having really difficult individual battles, then actually you do want this. You do want to make sure the player is always has some way to be fighting most bosses at full strength, because you're not testing your player necessarily on resource management. You're testing them on their mastery of the battle system. And so there is sort of this tension between these two approaches. So for your game, you should think, what's most important to you? A resource management thing or mastery of combat system? You can also kind of try to do both, but there's going to be some ways that they disagree a little. Another thing that kind of shows like a kind of design tension is shops and crafting versus exploration rewards. So this is a way that management and exploration can be in tension. So before this, we were talking about how management and strategy can be in tension. This is difficult boss battles versus resource management, right? So this strategy focus is all on like making a super tightly designed combat. But in order for this to be fair, you kind of need to loosen the management requirement by making it that whenever a battle begins, you're always in tip-top shape, right? Um, so all of these examples I'm talking about here are all ways that these pillars can be in tension, and you want to kind of think about, you know, which is the one that's most important to you. But yes, so there is a way in which management and exploration can actually be in tension too. And this is with shops and crafting versus exploration rewards. So, having extensive shops full of powerful items and having crafting systems that create powerful equipment are all ways to bolster the management pillar, right? Shops and crafting empower your players to plan ahead, to think about how to put together the funds they need for this or that item, or giving themselves a multiple step objective to find all the pieces and ingredients they need to craft a powerful piece of gear and stuff like that. These are all entirely self-directed goals the game doesn't need to make explicit, and it makes obtaining those items really exciting. However, every cool piece of gear obtained from a shop or crafting system are items that could have instead been found through exploring. If all of the best gear is only found in shops at the end of elaborate crafting tasks, it makes the dungeon treasure less exciting. So that's another way. The more you can get through management is stuff kind of taken away from exploration, and vice versa. Now, if you've been watching my streams for a little while, you might kind of see where I'm going with this, because this is something I've talked about before. I kind of wonder if anyone sees where I'm going with it. Exactly, Wolfalato. So the go-to example I always go with is not actually an RPG, it's a Metroidvania. Take, for example, Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow for the Nintendo DS. It's not a JRPG, of course, but bear with me. Despite being a Metroidvania, a game genre that thrives on how exciting and rewarding exploration is, the game severely hobbles its exploration rewards for the benefit of a crafting system. Now, don't get me wrong, the game is great, it's a staple of its genre, but its crafting system, in my opinion, was a huge misstep. And one that I think illustrates the tension between management and exploration very well. It's a game that famously features an elaborate crafting system using enemy souls, which are these rare drops from enemies. Nearly all of the game's higher tier weapons, all of them pretty much, are set aside as unique rewards for that crafting system. Only about a quarter of the game's 80 weapons are actually found by exploring. And those are mostly the bottom tier weapons of their respective categories. Compare this to the game's predecessor, Area of Sorrow, where the vast majority of weapons are found through exploration. And yes, it is grindy about it. You need to kill, dozens of zombies to get their soul so you can, it's really that bad. I think Dawn of Sorrow is a really good example of how sometimes aiming to bolster one of these pillars, if it goes against a pillar that's more important for your game, can be a huge mistake. And yes, in Dawn of Sorrow, they traded some of the best stuff you can find exploring, some of the most satisfying finds exploring. They put it all in a crafting system. I think that was a huge mistake. Now, it's still good. It is still good. Don't get me wrong. That game is absolutely worth playing. It's actually, in part, worth playing to see this. Because it really drives the point home. Like, playing this game is how I realized this point, in a way. This is kind of like how I realized that like a crafting system can be a bad idea. That sometimes adding a new feature to something actually just makes it worse. I think it's a really good example. Yes. So I think there you go. So there you go, right there. Very concrete example of how, you know, pillars can be in tension. So you need to be aware of what's important for your game, what your game is leaning into, to make sure you don't make a mistake like that, you know? It's not really about few or like having too much or too few features. I think it's more about if those features are right for the game, you know? I mean, don't think necessarily the Dawn of Sorrow crafting system was badly implemented. I'm sure some people liked it to just like grind in the game, you know. I'm sure some people like that as just kind of a fun sort of chill activity to do or something. I'm sure there's some people out there to whom Dawn of Sorrow is like a fond childhood memory, even if some of it was like mindless grinding because they just appreciated it. You know, people can sometimes appreciate grinding. It's like a kind of chill activity. It's more time you're spending in the world, you know. I personally don't like it very much, but, it's complicated. People like games for all sorts of weird, complicated ways. Still, I think arguably the bigger problem isn't the grinding in this case. It's that it took rewards that are very important for the game's core exploration thing and put it into some other thing that the game didn't really need, you know? I think that's the problem here. It's hobbling a really important part of your game to bolster something that it didn't necessarily need, you know? And I feel like when you play Dawn of Sorrow, I feel like you kind of feel that it's missing exploration rewards. Now, that might just be me, but I feel like when I play that game, I'm always kind of disappointed by what I find when I find a secret. And I feel like there's not that many secrets in the game either. I feel like, you feel the effect it has on the game. I really think you do. So what I'm saying is, every cool item set aside for a crafting system or a shop inventory is an item that could have been an exciting find somewhere in a dungeon. Maybe hidden in a secret room or as a drop from an enemy or a reward for a puzzle. So ask yourself, planning and exploration, does your game have a preference? Where does it stand? It's an important question to ask. Now, I don't want you all to think that I really hate crafting systems or shops and all that. Like I said earlier, there is value, I think, to crafting systems. Like I said, it's crafting systems have a very powerful part to them where they represent a goal the player gives themselves as opposed to a goal the game tells you to do. You see the crafting system and you see what you can do with it. And you decide, oh, this sword will go really well with what I'm doing. And now you start to plan ahead on, okay, wait, so I'm going to go over there because there's going to be the enemy I need to kill. And I remember getting this item over here. And you start planning in your head, and it's an entirely self-directed goal. This, I think, is the big advantage of crafting systems is that they are self-directed player goals. And when a player thinks about the game in that way, that gets them more involved in it. That makes them thinking ahead. That gets them planning ahead their next steps instead of just sort of, mindlessly following what the game tells them to do, So I think there are really good parts to crafting systems. You just need to think about, are you taking something away somewhere else? What is the cost of adding this system to your game, There you go. Now, speaking of games with rare drops from enemies, I think this is a sometimes maligned feature in games that you should not necessarily discard. This is kind of a side thing here about rare item drops. I mean, this is a question you should ask yourself. Should you get some rare item drops in your game? Should you put, that some monsters just have a 1 in 16 chance to drop this or that? This isn't really. I mean, it's kind of tied to some of the pillars. It's kind of a management thing. It's kind of an exploration thing. It's kind of a combat thing. I guess it's mostly a management and exploration thing. So, rare drops. Should you have rare drops in your game? What are the pros and cons of having rare item drops in your game? On one hand, they're kind of like a way to make your game more grindy. You have to kill an enemy 200 times to get, the magic pants of freedom or whatever. But I think you should not necessarily discard rare drops as a feature of your game. Rare item drops are a valuable tool. They can bolster the management pillar of your game and the exploration to a smaller degree. You should think of rare drops a bit like a randomizer feature of your game. By design, rare drops are rewards that very few players get to find, but most players will get at least one drop over the course of their game. So when a player stumbles on a rare drop in a game, their playthrough now has a unique element to it that few others have. They've now gained some advantage that they may or may not be able to capitalize on. This makes rare drops ideal for very niche but powerful items that require a bit of thinking to get the most out of. Something that would invite your player to play a bit differently to get something out of it, as opposed to just a straightforward equipment upgrade or some overpowered weapon like the Chrysogrim, for instance. I mean, it's fun to put an absurdly powerful thing somewhere in the game because that's just a fun thing to put in. But in addition to this, people learning about a rare drop can give themselves a goal to obtain this rare item as a player-driven task, like I was saying earlier about, crafting. Especially if the player has tools at their disposal to increase drop rates of items, because that makes this item finding task less tedious, and it makes it less tedious when done deliberately, right? So the existence of items that raises your rare drops means that there's kind of two modes of getting this item. One mode is just randomly stumbling upon it, which is like it's a randomizer, right? Like some players are going to get some item to use. Or if you know about the item and you're deciding to go get it, now you're going to get some gear to increase your item drop rate, and then you're going to go to work. And now it's a player-driven goal. Of course, particularly rare drops comes with the same issues as items set aside for shops and crafting. These items are essentially removed from your game's exploration rewards if the item drop is the only way to obtain it. So be careful not to overindulge in ultra-rare drops in an exploration-oriented game. Always make sure to leave some great rewards for the exploration itself, and make sure that those exploration rewards aren't just made completely moot by something you can get in some other way, right? Yeah. Well, what I did in Look Outside, I didn't do this for all of the rare drops, but what I did in Look Outside, if you remember, I made it that most of the rare drops are things you can also get by trading. So most enemies that have rare drops usually drop a secondary tradable item of some kind. Yeah, there's the cassette tapes. The cassette tapes is one of them. So in Look Outside, there's these enemies that come out of the crashed bus, right? And depending on Like all of these enemies have all sorts of weird, rare items they can drop, but they also have a very high chance of dropping a cassette tape. And the cassette tape is, yeah, it's more of a common drop. It's like a 1 in 2 chance for most of them. And so as you kill a bunch of these enemies, you're going to collect some cassette tapes. And you're probably going to collect at least 6 of them. And then there's one character that can trade you some of those rare drops for a number of cassette tapes. And so that way, I can both have rare drops, but also you can, to a certain limited degree, be sure to get at least one of those items if you really want it. So I feel like that's a good way to both have rare drops that's going to kind of randomize the things people get, but also give players some tools to like build a very specific party setup if they really need it, you know? But yeah, so these are all questions worth asking about your game, depending on those pillars. How much should the answer to those questions shift and change throughout your game too? Maybe every chapter shifts these a bit, or maybe even a lot, you know? So you could have some chapters, some parts of your game. Now this is more for like a larger scale game than like a first time game, but you know, you can imagine some parts of your game just kind of lean a little bit more into resource management, and some parts might lean a bit more into combat or exploration. And that can be a way to sort of shift the game a little bit, have the different sections of your game kind of lean into something a bit more that can help to, you know, vary the game's tone a bit, the pacing a bit. Yeah. But yeah, so these are all, these are all sort of like large scale questions about your game that you should consider. Well, and that's it for the pillars. That is it for the pillars. Any questions? So I feel like this way of thinking about RPGs and like on a large scale is useful. I feel like this is a way for you to think about your game's priorities and decide, depending on what you want to lean into, depending on what's important for you personally as you build your game. I feel like it's going to help make those decisions, you know? And I feel like it's also something good for whenever you're stumped on a question about the game, you're not sure whether you should do this or do that. You can always kind of like go back to your pillars as sort of a way to, you know, like you shouldn't do everything mechanically, like always just follow, okay, you know, I decided my game is more about the strategy side, right? That doesn't mean every single decision needs to fall for the strategy side, right? But whenever you need something to kind of like, whenever you're really stuck on something, you know, maybe go back to your pillars as a way to get an answer if you're really stuck otherwise, you know? You feel like your game has none of these. Well, are you making an RPG? I mean, like I said, this is sort of a way to think about sort of the generic sort of JRPG kind of game. But you know, you might be making something that's much more interested on story, right? Tell me a little bit about your idea. Maybe we can untangle it a little bit. A roguelike is all about exploration. A roguelike, exploration is like the big part of a roguelike, I would say. I mean, there's still management and there's strategy, of course, but you're always in the exploration phase, you know? I mean, some roguelikes have like cities, have like safe spots you can go to, and you're always a little bit managing. in a roguelike. You're always like going into every time you go into your menu in a roguelike, you're always kind of like leaning a little bit more, in organizing and everything, but you're almost always in like an exploration state in a roguelike. And Metroidvania, that's also very much more of exploration, on the exploration side. I mean, a lot of this, I would say that if you're working on something that isn't an RPG, the pillars might be different. You might need a different way to think about these because, the genre itself shifts more towards exploration. So I feel like if you're moving away from RPGs, like the pillars might need to be shaped a little differently. Or maybe too many games, this might not be as useful as like a structure of a way to think about things for other genres. Because too many games using this structure, this way to think about them, might look alike. Like too many games might and if every game is very similar with a way to look at it, then that's less useful as a way to think about how different they are. So Tazzle Grant says, my game is more humor focused, and it's more like a lot of side quests and character interactions and different choices that impacts what happens. So maybe it's a little bit less combat focused. Is there still going to be combat? It does seem like it's just going to be a very exploration focused kind of game. Well, also what I was saying is, it seems like if there's combat, but there's not much of it, then what you're thinking about is a game that really prioritizes pacing, right? So you're going to want to really, for this game, you're going to want to really tone down the strategy pillar. It's still there, but you want to tone it down because you don't want to distract from what you're doing, from the dialogue and everything. So you want to really shrink down the strategy. And now, what about exploration? Is the game very straightforward to navigate? Is there going to be secrets? Is there going to be things to find? Is there going to be, it might still have, but I would say definitely you want to shrink down the strategy side. You don't want strategy and combat to distract or slow down sort of the story. Meaningful choices, yeah, no, I mean that's part of the story writing part. This is more about like the gameplay. Um, but I mean, there's still ways that it fits into it. But yeah, if your game is very very story focused and isn't really like much of a like a dungeon crawl sort of deal, then I would say you're toning down exploration, you're toning down strategy, and management. Like I said, management is sort of like what I was thinking about when you're not in a threatened area, when you're like going around and talking to NPCs and stuff. The next stream is going to be about making a more specific plan and starting to build a vertical slice. So yes, I'll be starting to actually put together a game in the next stream. If it's an open world game, then yeah, that's definitely some exploration in there. Mm-hmm. Yep, this week is Broad Strokes. But yeah, yes, some games might actually be missing pillars a little bit, or at least there's some games where the pillars might not necessarily have like phases of gameplay for them, right? So, for instance, um, take a game that's like more of a dungeon crawler, right? An RPG that's like a dungeon crawler where there isn't really a town, right? Now, I think the three pillars are still there, but it just takes a very different shape because management and exploring are always happening in the same phase. Management and exploring are just kind of like always sort of happening together. Your management in a game like this is literally your menu screen. This is when you're in management phase. Your menu screen, or I guess when you find a shop along the way or something, right? And then over here, you have your combat. But management and exploration wouldn't have these separate, like, distinct phases because you're always just exploring and always managing. But then a battle begins, and that's like its own separate state when a battle starts. And now you're thinking about combat, right? So yeah, there's some games where there are very obvious, distinct phases of play that separate the pillars. But there's some games where it's not as obvious, and there might be some moments where it's separate. Also, there's games where the merging of the pillars is different. There's going to be some games where combat and exploration instead are merged. If you have kind of a Zelda sort of game where combat doesn't happen on like a separate screen and you're just fighting as you explore, right? Now, this isn't really the kind of game we're talking about here. There's a whole section about turn-based combat in a later stream. That is definitely not going to be very relevant for that genre. But yeah, sometimes the phases aren't that simple. Yeah, I wasn't really thinking of having a story pillar. Because in my head, the story pillar is really like part of the management one. Because that's when you're thinking ahead of what you're going to be doing later. This is about planning ahead. This is thinking about like the less immediate parts of the story, So in my head, story is just part of management here. Because that's the long-term stuff. That's the characters. That's thinking about the world. That's thinking about all the larger scale things. This is really, in my head, management, like I said earlier, is long-term. And strategy is short-term. And exploration is kind of like the sort of whatever links the long term and the short term together, the middle term. And you could think of this as being the real names of those pillars, but in RPGs usually it's that this is how these are, distributed. But yeah, in reality it's really just long-term planning and thinking, short-term planning and thinking, and sort of like the middle term that links them together. But in my head, it's generally town is the long-term planning, exploration is the sort of in-between, and battle is this one, Yeah. So I guess if you keep them as long-term, middle, and short-term, that does make it more easy to apply to like every game genre. That becomes more of a generally applicable. But assigning this to be management, exploration, and strategy is, I guess you could argue, the RPG version of this graph, of this concept. Yeah. But yes, I think sort of thinking about your game and how it fits into these things is helpful. It's not always going to be helpful. It's not going to help you with every decision. But I think, as long as it's helpful sometimes, it's worth keeping around. Yeah. Yeah, it's not always going to fit neatly into every project, but I think it's a useful it's a useful what's the term? A useful construct. There you go. It is a useful model, a useful construct. Yes. All right. Well, I'm actually done with everything I prepared for this stream. I mean, the next stream I have some stuff like for like the vertical slice, but I feel like getting into these I wouldn't be able to like finish them. So yeah, this ended up being a little bit shorter than expected. I was kind of like trying to give me a lot of extra time because um, I was kind of giving myself a little extra time because for the crash course I ended up running out of time. So I was trying to be a bit more conservative with time allocation for this one, but I was a little too conservative with it there, perhaps. But yes, if you have any questions, I mean, we do it. That does leave us some time for some Q&A. Maybe we can talk about your specific projects and talking about sort of how it fits into this model and what kinds of decisions that you might be wondering about and all that. How do you tend to go about planning mechanics? I have something in mind, but I'm worried it's not a good idea. It's a stat augmentation system where you use consumables to put point into stat growth metrics. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think this is like this is just a stat growth thing like any other. I would say the biggest issue I would see coming with something like this is how difficult or easy it's going to be to balance the game around it. Like how easy is it going to be for you to sort of like dole out the resources for that to make sure that you have some control over the strength of the player over the course of the game, so that you can't you know so that you can't because you need to be able to balance the game to the player's strength in some way. And the more you give ways for the player to get strong, and the less you have control over how quickly they get strong, the harder it is to balance them, right? So I would say that that's the main issue you need to think about for something like this. It's not really a case. I feel like it's not really something the pillars can answer for you. This is more about you have to think ahead about how you're going to distribute these items, how you're going to limit how strong players can get with them, so that you can effectively balance the game. This to me would be the biggest worry I have for something like this. Doesn't mean it's bad. Just you need to think about this as a problem to solve for this idea. Because there's a lot of good about it. It can be really fun to manage your characters and feel like you're building your own character, right? And something like this would definitely give the player like a tool they can use to sort of build their character the way they want, and that's good. But on the other hand, it comes at this cost that it might make the game harder to balance. But it's just a problem to solve, like any other problem. It all depends on how you actually obtain those items, those consumables. And those consumables might be, distributed in a very limited way. Or maybe the cost of those consumables might go up like in a way that like by the time you would get overpowered, the next level up is too expensive, So you can set it up like this. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways to try and solve this problem, but you do need to solve it. Let's see. I have several ideas, but can't figure out how to put them into the game, how to express them, and how to create the art to express the idea of the game. Every time I try, I get angrier about trying again. Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure how to approach this because it's a very abstract problem that you're explaining here. I feel like I might need more concrete examples of the problem. It feels a little too abstract to answer. Um, Steel Soldier. So imagine this situation. You're not the best person at writing a story or characters. I understand that situation very well. But you're alright at doing battles and a bit of level design. With this set of skills, would it be better to sacrifice the management pillar and focus on the other pillars instead? Not really. You can make a game that has management but still has a very simple story. You can simplify the story way down. Yeah, you don't need to have a story. Or you can have a story that's like very minimalist, but you can still have a big management pillar. I don't think not being very confident in your writing needs to necessarily limit the parts, the types of gameplay that you need to explore. I think you can very much make now if you could decide to sacrifice the long term and make things very simple and you're always exploring as a way to sort of minimize how much you need to do writing. Like that could be a strategy to do it. That's absolutely something you could do. But I don't think it's something you necessarily have to do. I think you very much could explore long-term planning stuff, and you can just make the writing very simple. You can find all sorts of contrivances. You can find all sorts of contrivances to simplify the writing. You can make it that like it's an entire world of like weird little robots or something, or you can have like you can just have that the story is just minimalistic too. Like there could be an entire world and everything, but people don't mind just not have a lot to say. Maybe it's a village of like mysterious characters and cloaks that just have a few words to say and stuff like that. You can also another thing. You might think you're not the best person at writing a story or characters, but a game like this could also be a way for you to start experimenting with this. You might get better at it. And a game like this that's like light on story but still has some of it, that can be a really good way to get into that and actually start writing more. And you might develop a knack for it through this project or other projects like it. Let me read more. Once you receive. For me, Fish Face Terror said, for me, I've been thinking of some system where HP is represented by an astronaut being tempted into taking off their helmet. That's pretty fun. I like that. That's pretty fun. But it's represented. So you just mean the visual representation of HP and it's otherwise like a regular RPG? Or it's like you're playing as an astronaut and if your HP goes down to 0, there's a little cutscene where you remove the helmet and you die. That's fun. That's a fun idea. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Landshark says, I plan on barely having a story myself. At most, the writing's probably just going to be funny character bits, if I think of them. Yeah, sure. That's up to you. You don't, just because you're making an RPG, doesn't mean you need to have an important story part of it. But you should consider this if you just don't think of yourself as a writer. You should consider an RPG like this that's light on story as a way to just kind of practice your writing. Because that's great. Like you can have like a very simple game with very little story, but still have a bunch of little NPCs that say a few things here and there, and that can be like that can be great writing practice. And maybe as you write stuff like this, ideas are going to start to come to you, and you might improve. Um, let's see. I can get into the weeds about story for my game jam game. Mm-hmm. We have a section about balancing skills and equipment. Probably the most daunting part of RPG design to me. Yes, I will. I will definitely go into balancing. Yes, there's going to be a whole thing about balancing. I'm not sure yet where I want to put that. Um, if it should be like, I guess it should be after like basic combat design stuff, and maybe more towards the end. Um, because I feel like there's a lot of things that need to come first. But yes, I absolutely want to have a stream that's going to be about balancing. Yes. Let's see. So Wayward Reflection says, I had this idea for a game where everything that you do shapes the player character's worldview, which would then have direct consequences on the things around him, sort of like experiencing a dream. For example, if they're convinced to ignore someone, that person might shift to a background character or even stop existing altogether. I was wondering if you think this is something attainable for a short beginner game, or if you think it's too much. That would, I don't know. I think it's attainable, but it sounds like a very conceptually challenging game to put together. Um, like, it feels like the kind of thing where you would need to go into this with a very detailed plan, because that seems to me like it would involve a lot of interlocking complexity. Um, so I feel like, so I don't think I would recommend this as someone's first game. But if you were going to make that eventually, it would probably need to be a very small scale game, of a scale like the scale I was talking about earlier here. It should be like a 3-4 hour game. But even as a 3-4 hour game, it probably shouldn't be your first, because that seems very complex. That seems like very complex for reasons completely separate to being an RPG. It feels like that would be complex even as a purely text-based game, like a text adventure, which is probably like some of the easiest kinds of games to put together on a technical side. That would be a difficult game to make as a text adventure game. Yeah, that seems like, depending on how ambitious this mechanic is, like I can imagine a simple version of it where what you're saying there isn't actually a game mechanic, it's just sort of a story concept, right? So I could imagine a very linear and basic version of what you're saying there, word reflection. You know, like the fact that when you think about something, it affects how the game works and everything. But it's just sort of a scripted, and it's like a series of things that always happen the same way, right? Like a simple version of this that's very linear and basic. This one would probably be doable, but the version of this where this is like a dynamic thing that affects the game to this degree, that would be very complicated. There would be a lot of like building complexity to this, that I would definitely not recommend to you do as the first project. So depending on how it stands on this line, on this spectrum, yeah. Let's see. Fish face terror. Brain Rot Fever says, my current RPG big idea is more an open world, but I'm currently wanting to focus on the silly dinner dash idea as a mini project, even though that'd be an unimportant mini game to the grander scale. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're making more of a mini game that isn't really itself like an RPG, then the workshop isn't going to be as useful for that. Because I'm really just talking about like RPG mechanics here. But as a first project, though, that definitely seems like it's it's a good way to make this more feasible. Um, oh, a question related to the Lua script you put together. Where do I define folder paths? Oh yeah, I could show that. So, folks, if you're making an RPG Maker MZ game, yeah, you know what? I could do this. Although if people have more questions, I should probably answer those. But, so if you're making an RPG Maker MZ game, and you would really like to be able to make pixel art assets for it, right? But the game, but like RPG Maker has like this super big resolution, and you don't want to have to deal with that. You don't want to have to make like super high resolution assets. So what you can do is you actually draw low resolution sprites, right? And then you scale up all of your art assets 2 times or 3 times or 4 times so that your game assets are like these scaled up sprites, like with Look Outside. This is what I have for Look Outside. So if you go look into my assets and Look Outside, the way that I get like a pixel style like this is, let's just get let's just look at the rats here. No, this is assets. This is the wrong folder. Whoops. If you go into the assets for Look Outside, let's go into enemies, and let's go into fungus enemies, and let's look at this gentleman. So you see, everything is scaled up 4x here. So all the sprites are just scaled up 4 times, and this is how I have all of the game's assets look like these big fat pixels, despite RPG Maker MZ having a higher resolution. Now, you can alter the scale as well as the engine, yes. But some of the engine kind of looks wonky if you just lower the resolution. Some stuff kind of looks bad, I think. So this is why I go for just scaling up the assets, right? Now, the problem with scaling up assets like this is that it's very tedious. Every time you need to keep your assets separate somewhere, right? So I have all of my assets in a separate thing outside of the project in an assets folder where I replicated the exact same image folders, right? And where I have all of those same monsters, all those same sprites at their native resolution. So see this one? This one is at the native resolution. It's not scaled up. And whenever I modify a sprite, this is where I do it. And then when I'm done modifying a sprite, say I want to edit this here. So I want to add some, some more outlines again around around its adorable little footsies here. And around the little fingers here. There you go. So I want to update this in the game now, right? So I save it. And then I would need to scale up using sprite size, nearest neighbor scaling for X. And then I do save as, and then I save it in the right spot on the right thing. And it's very tedious, as you might imagine, to do this for every single asset in the game. But what you can do instead is to make a script that does all of that for you automatically, instantly. And this is what I made. It's called Export RPG Maker Assets. And bam! Everything I would have needed to do manually, it just happened instantly. And I made a public version of that script that you can download and you can use for your project. If you go on the Discord in the RPG Maker workshop, there is a pinned message. Wait, is that in the... Did I actually pin this or not? Hang on. Oh, wait, it's no longer pinned because... Wait, can you only have one pinned message? Wait, where is it? Hang on. I'm trying to find where it was. I need to get the file and oh no, I need to find it. I need to scroll back up. Oh no. This is awkward. Where is it? Maybe I just forgot to pin in, yeah. Oh, if you check below the stream, you'll find the Discord link. Hang on, I'll find it. I'm almost there. I think I'm almost there. God damn it. Lua. I'm just going to search for Lua. Okay, I think I got it maybe. Okay, there we go. Okay, I got it. I'll pin it. I'll pin it. There you go. It's pinned now. Now I'll scroll down a bit just in case I made it. Okay. And I made a final version later. That's even better. So I'll pin this one instead. There you go. So it should be pinned now. There you go. Now it should be pinned. It says invalid invite. Wait. Whoa. Oh, it does? Hang on. Someone before said that they had problems. Can anyone else access it? Is that Discord link actually not working? Hang on. I'll get the Discord link from Steam. It just doesn't work there? That's weird. I don't know why. It should be... okay, I'll just get the Discord link from the Look Outside store page. It should be there. There we go. Okay, this should be the link. I don't know if it's the same link as the one below the stream. But yeah, so if you go there and you go into the RPG making workshop channel there, in the pins, there should be a link to a Lua file. Okay, now let's explain how to actually install it. So you need Asprite. This is a script I made for Asprite. Okay? There are some instructions in the file. You're going to need to follow them. This is the file here. You're going to need to follow these instructions in the file. There's some instructions at the top. This is where I said earlier you should get Notepad++ for programming. One of the reasons is Notepad++ colors everything based on the language. So yes, if you follow these instructions and follow them correctly, you should be able to use this. Yeah, these are all the instructions. It's not too bad. And hopefully, if you do this, you should be able, hopefully, to make your own low resolution. There is some setup you have to do as well. So there's stuff here. Yeah, you have to fill in this to fit your project here. So there's some stuff to set up here. Because depending on your project, you might want different assets to be scaled different amounts. Like Look Outside uses a scale of 2 for map assets for like tiles and a scale of 4 for battle assets. So this is where you set this up. These are like for each different types of asset, giving them all different scale numbers. Yep, there is an error at the end that just tells you success. And if you did something wrong, it's going to tell you that you did something wrong. And it should hopefully help you fix what went wrong. Yeah, hopefully that should help. If anyone has problems implementing it, you can ask in the RPG making workshop channel. at the Discord, and we should be able to figure this out. Yep. So Malison, my main project, my main sort of like 10, 12 year in the making project, at first was actually started as an RPG Maker project. And I did not have a script for this one. And I did have to scale everything up. And so the entire time that Malison was an RPG Maker project, everything I had to scale manually. It was very annoying. I had to scale everything manually the whole time. It was quite annoying. All right, well, anyone else has some problems and some issues or anything, or any questions they'd like to ask about sort of their project planning? I could kind of start thinking a little bit about, I have so much time left today. Maybe I should actually start a little bit on what I wanted to do next time. Like, there's enough time for that. There's not enough time to get to. Yeah, there isn't enough time to get to, like, the vertical slice. But I could do the other thing. I could start talking about what the project that I'll be making and how it would fit in these pillars. Why not? You know what? Maybe session 1 not a success yet. Maybe session 1 continues a little bit. Yeah, how about actually apply all of this into the actual game that I'll be making for this? Why not? Yeah. There's really no reason to cut. There's really no reason to cut this off of. Yeah. Yeah, there isn't really a reason to wait for next week for that part. I mean, yeah, in that way, next week there's going to be more time to get entirely into like building a vertical slice. Yeah, why not? Why not? There's no time like the present. There is no time like the present. Let's just do it now. Let's do it live. I don't need to prepare for this anyway. The whole point of this is that it's improvised, that I like make it up on the spot, using in part that model here. Okay, so what game should I do for the workshop? Well, I'm thinking, okay, part of the thinking here is, of course, this is a game I'm making for the purpose of explaining things about game design and everything. So I feel like for that reason, all 3 pillars should probably be kind of even, because the whole point is to show every part of RPGs, right? So if I was focusing that project entirely on one pillar, that would kind of hinder this as an explicative of RPGs, right? So I should probably keep things kind of even for that project, huh? Should kind of keep this balanced. I feel like that makes sense for yeah. I should probably make something kind of balanced for it. Sure. You know what? Let's go over like the notes that I had on building an outline. Maybe that's going to help you guys too a little bit, getting ahead of like building a yeah, maybe this is the right thing to do here. Maybe we should go into building an outline. Yeah, you know what? Absolutely. Let's do that. Let's go into building an outline. Oh. Okay. So, session 2. This was meant to be session 2, but maybe it's going to be session 1 after all. Let's make a quick game outline for the project that I'll be developing alongside this workshop. Now, we're going to go over general ideas of the game, but without going too far into specifics and keeping level design details vague. So I think this level of detail should be enough to get me started without over planning. Just enough to think about the general way pieces of the game fit together. More a way to organize my thought than anything. Everything that follows is going to be subject to change if something doesn't work out or if I get a better idea along the way. Now, okay, let's make something a little bit generic. I'm going to push it a little further than what I was saying earlier. I was suggesting 3 to 4 hours. But, again, like I said, just so I can show a little bit of every type of thing, I'm going to make my example game a little longer than this. It's going to be more of a 4 to 6 hour kind of deal, I think. And it's going to be made entirely through the packaged in assets. So I'm just going to be using RPG Maker's RTP, right? And, I might do some examples. I might do like some tweaks on some assets. But I'm going to try to not make any fully original assets unless absolutely necessary. Because the whole point is, I want to demonstrate the value of sturdy game design. So I want everything else to be as simple, as straightforward as possible, right? Now, let's see. I think we're going to have very simple thing here. Yeah, I'm going to make a very generic, very basic RPG, I think. We'll see. We'll see how long I do. I end up testing out the games made during the jam. We'll see how many games are submitted. Yeah, we'll see. We'll just play it by ear. Okay, so let's see here. Let's say we have a big old game world, and there's going to be like one city, and there's going to be like an evil dungeon, final boss area here. And there's going to be like a few little secondary dungeons. So I'm really building something here that's going to help me give examples of a bunch of different things, right? So yeah, let's have a world map. Let's have a few little scattered explorable areas of different types, again, so I can just show different kinds of dungeons. Let's have maybe the world map split by like a river or something like this, with probably everything on the other side of that river being like much more dangerous, right? So that way I can sort of have like this sort of gradient of difficulty. Maybe the only way to cross the river is like crossing a bridge, and there might be something really nasty on there, and maybe you need to get something to pass the bridge. So that way you kind of have like a before the bridge and after the bridge thing going on, right? So like, okay, say you start in the city, and the city is like under attack by like the Demon King or something, or some sort of evil wizard or a dragon. To be, yeah. You start in a big city. There could be an introduction where the city's under attack. That's always nice. Or maybe you go out of way. Yeah, that's a classic, right? You go out from, you go to do something that's like a tutorial, and on your return, the city's under attack. That's always fun. Everyone loves that. Hey, listen, it's a trope for a good reason. Yeah, you start in the city. City's peaceful. Then you go out and you do like something in like a forest. You go back. City's under attack. Classic. Classic. Um, and then let's see. What would you need to do to get past the bridge to get to the evil wizard, whatever, demon king castle? What would you need to do? What would be the sequence of events here? So we're really talking about a sequence of events here, right? You start in the city, then go to this, then return to the city, and he gets under attack. And this is like the third phase of the game is like city number 2 here, right? And then maybe from this point on, you're kind of free to like do bits of everything. Maybe like there's like an evil monster guarding the bridge here. And maybe yeah, you need to get something to kill that troll, or yeah, that bridge troll or whatever it is. Or maybe it's more like there's like a shield blocking, and you need to maybe you need to like speak to like to yeah, there could be like let's say there's a forest, like an evil forest. Or something like that. And you need to speak to like a witch in the woods. And you need help from the witch of the woods in order to beat the thing on the bridge, right? Yeah, the Wicked Woods. That's the one. And then maybe the witch in the woods actually like sends you around to, maybe you need to gather a few different items to get the item. Or maybe not the woods. Maybe the witch has like, it's more like an hermit. And maybe it's like something you can access from the world map. So maybe the witch has like a shack here, right? And then some of the ingredients she asks you to get are in the forest or in other places. So you need to like solve some kind of quest. And there could be some secondary quests here, of course, too. Yeah, there could be all sorts of little secondary quests. And once you solve these quests, you can finally beat whatever's on the bridge. And that lets you go attack the big spooky castle. Yeah, something like that. I think that makes a good. And then yeah. So yeah. So you go here, get over here, then return. Village is under attack. Or something like that. I'm not sure about the village under attack thing. That might be too generic. But I mean, Alright. Then the witch's shack would be sort of number 4. Sort of in the sequence of events of the game. This maybe is an optional thing. Just a question mark on optional things. Right? And maybe like the ingredients you need to get are in the forest. So maybe like 5, I guess, is the forest. Right? And then once you have everything, you can go on the bridge. 6. This is like the 6th step of the game. You go on the bridge. You fight something here. And then here, maybe these are all optional things. So this is like the end game here. So there's optional things you can do that are going to make the final part of the game. Going to make the final part of the game a little easier if you complete those. Maybe one of these is actually like a decimated village. Yeah, maybe like there's like a ruined village here. That's fun. I like a ruined village level. And maybe you need to do the ruined village before, maybe like the key to the castle. You find it in the ruined village. So maybe this is 7. If you need that, maybe 7, maybe the village is here. Yeah, this is the place that was decimated by the evil wizard or whatever it is, right? Um, this is going to be an optional thing, whatever it is. And then finally, the end of the game is going to be the final dungeon right here, where you fight the big bad evil guy, evil monster man. Yeah. Okay. Now, what kind of party do you have? I would say you start. I would say you start with just one guy here. Maybe you get a party member over here. Maybe you come back from that little thing to the village under attack with an ally with you, with a friend with you, right? And then maybe from this point on, maybe that friend is kind of like a tutorial for fighting with an ally. But then maybe that friend gets killed. Haha. Again, classic. This is just Massacre Princess. But hey, listen. You can't go wrong with the classics. That friend gets killed here, and that would mean that then you start after this when the game starts proper. And maybe from this point on, there's 3 characters you can find. Maybe you can recruit 3 characters. Maybe like one in the forest. Let's use orange for these. Maybe there's one in the forest you can recruit. Maybe here is where you can recruit another. Maybe you can hire one in town. I feel like maybe someone else you can recruit in the ruined village would be fun. Yeah, I don't know, something like that. We'll figure it out as we go. Okay, sure. So yeah, we have kind of like we have a place, we have like a series of events. This, like I said earlier, this is probably a bigger scope than you should have in your game. I'm adding a lot of extra dungeons here because again, I want to show a lot of examples of dungeons. So I feel like I need to specify this. You know, this is a little too ambitious for the purpose of like making a game quickly or making your first game. Just doing a little bit of extra levels here just so I can have a bunch of different types of dungeons to build, right? And yeah, I think this is simple. I think this works. There will be essentially one city. Um, one city, sort of a world map kind of place, a few little scattered places to explore. And some of these places are optional, might have characters to recruit. There's really like 2 main dungeons. The forest is going to be like kind of a main dungeon, and the final area here. And everywhere else is going to be more like small locations, like mini dungeons. Like 2 main dungeons and then a bunch of mini dungeons. And I guess maybe the ruined village. The ruined village could be one of these things that's like, it's like it's the dungeon that's kind of shaped like a village, but also has like some NPCs to talk to. That's always fun. I like this kind of thing. Okay, so as for other things, okay, I'm gonna say so. Like I said, the game should probably be fairly balanced between management, exploration, and strategy. But like I said earlier, I really like exploration, so exploration's probably gonna be like whoop, just a little whoop, just a little bit bigger, you know. Might have just a little bit of emphasis on exploration because I really like it. What can I say? I know what I like. All right, you got to know what you like. I like exploration. That's always what I dig into. Now, okay. listen, listen. Now, okay, I'm going to go with random encounters. There's going to be random encounters. Random encounters. There's definitely going to be random encounters in this. Um, hmm. Let's see. What other big decisions am I? I feel like the game should be fairly open ended. At least it should give the impression that it's open ended. Like there is going to be clearly like a sequence of events for you to get through the game smoothly, but I think you should be able to do all of this at any order, right? Like for instance, the monster on the bridge, maybe you can just kill it. Maybe you can just kill the monster if you're good enough. And the quest with the witch's shack and all this is just a way to bypass this fight, which would be like a really nasty fight. Maybe it would be almost as tough as like the final boss, but earlier, right? So that would be really nasty. But I think maybe you can just bypass, like this quest is just to bypass this, you know? Yeah, I like that. And everything else here is just ways to get stronger and to get this stuff to bypass this fight. Yeah. And yeah, cool. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. This is an outline right there. Um this is an outline right there. Let's see, what else? What else could we specify in this outline? Yeah, I always really like this. I always really like this sort of thing. Some sort of combat hook? Sure. What could be a combat hook? I feel like because I don't want to move too far away from like the most generic kind of RPG, you know? And I don't want to have too strong of a special hook. I feel like I want as much as possible that everything I do here is like as generally applicable as you can, you know? Like it should all be as basic as possible. And if I make something that has a bit too much of a special gimmick to it, you know, um, I feel like that would kind of, yeah, I don't know. Okay, one thing I definitely want to do is I want to have a mix of random encounters, but I also want a lot of areas to have really nasty wandering optional bosses. Wandering. I should just use the text feature for this. There you go. Wandering optional bosses. There we go. I love those. Okay. Random encounters. Wandering optional bosses. Always love these. Lots of secrets. Lots of secrets. Random drops. Yes. I'm thinking maybe your village. Ooh, oh, how's this? How's this? The village that you start with, like the city, I should kind of design it like a dungeon, I think. Village is explorable dungeon that opens over time. Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite tropes. I love city dungeons. I love that. I love a place you come back to, and every time you come back to it, There's a little bit more to see. Ooh, love that. Yeah, let's do this. That's so much fun. I love that. Yeah, city dungeons. It's my favorite part of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. The fact that every time you come back to that central city, that there's a little bit more of it to see, and every time it's a little exciting to see like where else you can go in it. I love that shit. That's so much fun. Yeah. And this is kind of set up for that. It's kind of set up for you to come back to the. Well, I guess. Hmm. I guess the way that the witch's hut, because now it's kind of set up for you to come back to the witch's hut, not the village. So if I want players to really keep coming back to that village, maybe the witch should live in the village. Maybe the witch should live in the city. You know. So maybe I should really think of the village as like the main hub here, and have a lot of these things happen in the village. Yeah. Yeah, I should probably have a lot of reasons for you to come back to the city. So, yeah. So, Witch's Hut is in the city. Which helps you pass the bridge. Maybe the witch is also the one that sends you away, and then you come back and maybe you're doing errands around the city or something. Yeah. I'm thinking the village, like the city, is going to have some battles hidden in it. Yeah, explorable dungeon. Village has some hidden battles in it. That's always really fun. Love that. Yeah. And how about the village has like a sewers underneath it? It's more of a city then. Sewers under the village. Secrets in there. Always love that. Always love that. So that's another dungeon though. Some kind of cursed city. Yes. Let's see. What if there was more than one way to bypass the bridge? What if there was a secondary way to bypass the bridge? What if there was also like a hidden tunnel here? That was like an alternate path. Yes, that is scope creep. That is indeed scope creep. Let's see. Alternate way past river? Perhaps. Let's think. That could be fun. That could be one of the side dungeons. Like I said, I do want to have a lot of side dungeons so I can show just a bunch of different types of dungeons. So that could be one of them. What could be the other side dungeons here? I would kind of want to have like a tower. So side dungeons, like a ruined tower. Whoops. Yeah, ruined tower, side dungeon, Um, Forest is a dungeon, a main dungeon here. Sewers is a main dungeon under the city. Ruined City. That's one. I guess the bridge is kind of a dungeon. I mean, it's straightforward. It's a gauntlet dungeon. We'll go into the different dungeon archetypes at one point. Maybe one that's like the alternate river crossing. Not sure yet what this is going to be. I'm thinking of like the different types of dungeons I want to show and how it would fit into these here. Of course, the evil castle. I need to actually come up with what the monster is going to be. Actually, I am using the default assets, am I? So I guess I actually have all of these decisions done for me already here. I have some assets to use. I need to actually pick monsters in the RPG Maker set. Yeah, let's do that. Let's look through RPG Maker monsters and actually decide based on that what the bosses are going to be. Yeah, I have assets to use. Let's use them. Let's look at RPG Maker assets here. RPG Workshop. There's the adorable little game that we built during the the crash course. That is a lot of fun. Though that is also a little bit of management. Well, I mean, if you have to build a part, the part about build making is more management. Sort of. Yeah. Okay, let's look at what we got here. We got some demons. We got some monsters. That's a demon king right there. That's a demon king right there. Oh my. Yeah, you even got some. Different forms for the demon. You know, they knew what they were doing here. You know, obvious layup for a villain that turns into a boss, and then it has a second form. You know, obviously what they want you to do with this. Okay, Black Knight. Black Knight could be the guy on the bridge. That could be the guy on the bridge. Birdman. Berserker. Alright. Dark Elf. We got a dragon. Dragon could be a good field monster. And the evil god, of course. That's like the super boss. The obligatory super boss. God of light. Alright, sure. Goddess of death. Great. Yeah, we got some monsters. The High King. The Hydra. That's a good Hydra. A whale. A kraken. A lich. Oh, look at this guy. Look at this guy. Look at this fun guy. Mecha Scorpion. Medusa. Oh, it's more of a jellyfish-looking Medusa. That's nice. There's a Mimic, of course. Odd Egg. Petit Devil? A Petit Devil? A Petit Devil. Yeah. Plasma. Salamander. There's some good monsters. There's some good monsters. Okay, here's the science fiction monsters here. There's alternate Demon of Universe. Well, damn. Yeah. We got some lads. The Slaughter Robot. Yeah. And we go back to regular fantasy monsters. Stone Knight. All right. Yeah, Demon of Universe. It's gonna be in there, of course. Now, okay. Okay, here's what I'm wondering. Should I do one thing to the game's assets? Should I do one thing to the game's assets? Let's experiment a little bit. Maybe the game does end up with some unique assets after all. Okay, let's do something. Let's try a little thing. See, just to see what it looks like, okay? Let's see. I'm going to go into RPG Workshop. All right. I'm going to make a new. So this is the project. I'm going to make a new folder here. A new folder. I'll call it Assets. Right? Just to see. I'm going to go here. I'm going to copy the contents of the image folder. I'm following the instructions of the script that I sent here. Okay? And then I'm going to paste this into assets. There you go. So now I have a copy of the assets in my assets folder. Okay? Now, I'm going to need to edit my script here. So open the scripts folder. I'm going to need to edit this one. Okay, I need to add the project here. So I'll copy this one. These are all my separate projects here that all have their own thing. Okay, here's what I'll do. So I'm going to save the blackboard here. And let's do it on... Let's do something. Let's first experiment with one of those monsters to start here. So let's go into RPG Workshop, Assets. Okay, which one should it be? Which monster should we experiment with first here? We do the Hydra. We do the Goblin. The Sandworm. Let's do it. Let's try the Dragon. All right, here's the Dragon. Okay, what am I going to do with this Dragon? I'm going to, first, I'm going to shrink this down 25%. Nearest neighbor. Okay. Then I'm going to change the color palette to... which one should it be? Which one should it be? NES? You know, I don't hate that. I mean, it's a little wonky, and oh yeah, it's a bit annoying what it does to black whenever I do this. Because it automatically, like by default sets... That's annoying. All right, let's try, let's try NES. Oh, it does? On where do the options are? Where are the options for that? Okay, let's go with edge 16 here. It's under indexed. More options. That doesn't give me that. Huh, I don't know. Is this somewhere else maybe? Anyway, that's not the problem I have. The problem I have is that it, by default, removes black whenever it does this. And it's kind of annoying. But anyway, let's just keep it simple. So yeah, let's go with ARN16. ARN32? ARN32. Okay. Remap palette. Yes. Okay. This is the result. This looks all right. And let's remove... And let's add a black outline to it. You know, it's a little messy. It's a little messy. But that's usable. And crucially, not only is it usable, but it's also more editable now. Now you can mess with it. It feels like something I can actually edit, you know? That's what I like about lower resolution. Just messing with something is so much easier, you know? Yes. Big, goofy eyeballs. Very good. All right, there we go. So maybe that's something I could do. Maybe that's something that I could do to the game's art assets. Instead of just... But on the other hand, like that would be fun. Oh, sorry. So that would be fun, and that would be one way to like give the game's art assets a bit more of a bit more of a bit more of, you know, a personal touch. But at the same time, I do actually like the idea of just making it, of actually just sticking to the default. So I don't think I'll do this. I think I'll just actually use the default, the default assets. But you know, that would be one way to kind of use the default assets, but you know, that would be kind of one way of using the default assets, but still just kind of messing with them and also making them something that's easier to mess with and modify. I don't know. I think this was a fun experiment. Oh, here's another thing you could do here. Let's get the worm. And here's a fun thing you can do. Let's shrink you as well to 25% and also apply ARN32 like that. And now, because the resolution is smaller and there's fewer colors, you can Frankenstein together the sprites a little bit. Now, in this case, it's not the best, but see, because the colors match more and it's based on like a smaller set, you can kind of use them together a little bit and make your own weird abominations. Now, again, this is a little messy here, but you see what I mean. You know, when you're working with fewer pixels and fewer colors, it's just easier to play around with it, you know? I mean, I could try to do this with the regular ones, but I don't think that would work very well. Let's go back to regular dragon here. All right. Can I do this with a regular worm? I don't think I can. I mean, it would probably take a little bit more, Photoshop expertise. Let's give it a shot anyway. Oh, right. I need to do some layer stuff for that. I don't know why it doesn't... Wait, why is it... What? What? Where's that pale white coming from? What? The hell is this? Oh, okay, I see. That was the problem. Oh, well, this kind of works, actually. This actually kind of works. You know what? This actually kind of works. What an abomination. Maybe you can kind of mess with the edges here, too. The majestic dragons. Hey, you know what? That's a monster right there. Yeah, no, that's a worm. You're right. There you go. I'm going to override the dragon. This is going to be the dragon now. That is perfectly usable. Perfectly usable. Dragon worm. There we go. Maybe I'll make some horrible abominations like this all over. See? You can just stick some shit together. There's no rules that tell you can't. You can just do that. Eminently usable. That's right. Eminently usable. Yeah, okay. I think... Yeah, I'm going to make it... Yeah, it's your Demon King. It's the evil Demon King. That's the Demon King's castle. I'll just use, like, the generic-ass Demon King sprites. Yeah, evil castle of the Demon King. Are there some regular demons, too? What kind of demons do we have here? Oh, this is the demon? Oh, is that actually not meant to be related? No, these are definitely meant to be related. So there's no, like, little demon. Well, I could modify some of these, the Black Knight. Yeah, some of these, can be demon-ish. Yeah, I mean, there's the demon pot. The demon pot. And there we go. We got a dragon worm. Oh, we can even mess with the colors. And the evil book. And the evil god. Foxman. That's a foxman. See? Yeah, this is fine. We'll have plenty to make we'll have plenty to make a game with all this. Yeah. And the Hydra. Hydra could be something in the forest. Or maybe the Hydra is the thing on the bridge. Yeah, a Hydra on the bridge. That makes sense. That makes sense to me. All right, yeah. I think that's a good general plan. Okay, but before we go, I do need to decide, what am I actually going to do for the vertical slice? What am I going to do for the vertical slice? So a vertical slice is meant to be a small self-contained part of your game that just kind of contains everything about your game's general like loop. So you can just kind of test out how your game feels, you know? It should have everything your game has normally, all the different parts of the game sort of in one place, right? So what parts of this here could work as the vertical slice? Maybe it's the city. Maybe the starting city is the vertical slice. Yeah. Maybe that starting city, if that city is going to be essentially like its own little dungeon, then maybe that's it. Yeah. The city is the vertical slice. So I think for my game, next week, I'll be building the city. And that's also going to be, it's going to be both the vertical slice, but also building the game's beginning, which this was going to be, you know, the vertical slice and the start of the game were going to be two completely separate things, but here I can make them the same thing. And, you know, that's great. Because, yeah, there's a lot of little lessons about what the start of your game should be like. And, yeah, sure. I think that's it. I think that sounds like a plan. Next week, I will be building the start of the game. I'll be building the city you start in. And that's essentially going to be both a little city and a little dungeon. And yeah, it's going to be a bit of everything. Great. That's cool. I think that works. I think this sounds like a plan. I mean, you know, it's still going to be mostly just improvising, but it's enough to get started. All right, nice. Okay, well, that's going to be it for tonight's stream, folks. That's going to be it for the first workshop. So, I hope this gave you guys some ideas on how to also sort of form a general game idea on your end, too. Will you do game test before the end of the jam to give general feedback? Not sure what you mean by that, Hazelbrand. I do want to play games that people make during the jam at the end. It's going to be at the end, though. At the end of the workshop. Yeah. So yeah, next week I'll be building a starting village, and yeah, that should be fun. All right. So thank you all for watching.